Aboard the research vessel Celestial Quest, Dr. Semir Roffin stared at a holographic panel that dominated his workspace. The lights of distant stars shone through the observation window, illuminating the rows of instruments and half-assembled prototypes scattered around the lab. He was a figure of contrasts, deeply methodical in his approach to science, yet always willing to explore radical ideas. On a battered metal table, half covered by sheets of calculations, rested a dark cylinder about the length of his forearm. He had named it the Cipher Lens, an unassuming core of black alloy with carefully arranged energy inlays. If it worked as intended, it had the potential to unravel the quantum fluctuations that formed the basis of nearly every known defensive shield. In other words, it could make a hostile world's fortifications vanish in seconds. Samir's superiors within the human combine had asked him to push the boundaries of quantum disruption technology, but they never truly believed he would succeed so quickly. As he ran another series of simulations, lines of code and streams of data flickered across his display, confirming that the device just might work. He had begun the project in the hope of creating a purely defensive means of shifting enemy fire away from vulnerable targets. It was never intended to be an offensive weapon, just a subtle rechanneling of force that would render traditional bombardment redundant. But the results of the initial tests were shocking. Instead of merely deflecting incoming energy, his device seemed to cause fatal instabilities in the entire shield matrix. Where a standard deflector shield might once have held off lasers or plasma cannons, it now buckled under its own collapsed waveforms. The scripts of code Samir had designed to dampen specific frequencies found resonance in ways he hadn't anticipated, suggest that his invention had a destructive potential far beyond any scale he first imagined. A trembling excitement mingled with dread. There was no telling what the High Council of the Human Combine would do with such power in their hands. He remembered how, in the earliest tests on the Kuvera frontier, the device had caused month-long distortions in the planet's protective field networks. Communications blackouts left entire settlements vulnerable to roaming pirate fleets. No official source admitted that Samir's device lay behind it all, but he heard rumors. Day by day, the rumors swelled. Soon, traveling merchants and rogue scientists whispered that the Combine had a new secret program capable of breaking the unbreakable. The scope of this rumor perplexed Samir. He was ordered, under the strictest protocol, to cease any further unauthorized experiments and to await direct instructions from the highest echelons. That directive arrived in the form of a coded message from Admiral Raz Norin, revered commander of the Combine's Outer Rim fleets. The command was simple: refine the device, optimize it for combat usage, and be prepared for deployment. When Samir stepped onto the Celestial Quest, he was greeted not by a typical research crew but by an entire fleet's worth of armed security. Guards watched him from every corridor. Advanced drones hovered in every lab, monitoring every aspect of his work. He tried to maintain a calm presence, but he couldn't ignore how substantially his life had changed. One moment he had been an idealistic researcher, dreaming of better defenses for humanity. The next, he stood in a labyrinth of hidden agendas and silent threats. The official explanation was that these measures were in place to protect him from sabotage by rival powers who would stop at nothing to seize such technology. But Samir also suspected that if he stepped out of line, he would be the one forcibly removed. Security cameras observed him even as he ate. The environment weighed heavily on him, but it did not stifle his passion for discovery. It only made him more cautious. Months passed at the edge of known space, far from the busy trade lanes of the galaxy's core. Samir immersed himself in quantum wavefield manipulation, accelerating his breakthroughs in the design of the Cipher Lance. He refined the device, reducing its size and mitigating unpredictable side effects. The entire while, he wrestled with ethical concerns. He had once admired the Combine's stated mission: unifying the scattered human colonies for mutual defense and prosperity. Yet, he knew that commanding a tool like the Cipher Lance could tempt any power structure beyond reason. Humanity was not alone in the galaxy. Dozens of alien civilizations had carved out their own territories, each with formidable defenses. Persistent hostilities flared along disputed borders, and trillions of lives were under constant threat of war. The Combine insisted that the Cypherlance would be used as a deterrent, but Samir suspected that the promise of near-invincible offense would be irresistible once hostilities arose. Everything changed when the Celestial Quest received an emergency call from Admiral Ras Norin's flagship, the Titan's Spear. A new alliance, calling itself the Vraxian Consortium, had declared open war on the Combine. The consortium included the Liathiae, the Calvon, and the Mardoculean races, historically at odds with each other, but apparently eager to unite against humanity. Their fleets began a massive advance into human territory. Samir suspected the Vraxians had gained intelligence about his device and feared that once the Combine had full control of it, no opposing force could stand a chance. The Celestial Quest slipped into an emergency jump to join the Combine's battered lines near the Saphrax Barrier, a remote region swirling with cosmic anomalies. Samir's invention could turn the tide, but the seeds of moral conflict gnawed at him. He had dedicated his life to engineering solutions for peace and security. Now that he saw the potential scale of destruction, he wondered if there was any turning back. The landing bay of the Titan Spear was abuzz with frantic activity. Overworked technicians ran to service battered starfighters limping in from the front. Ships carrying fallen soldiers and displaced civilians crowded the docking ports. In a dark corridor, Samir and his entourage of security officers were met by Admiral Ras Norin himself. Vestiges of the Admiral's once proud demeanor remained, but the war had taken its toll. Lines around his eyes had deepened, and his left arm bore fresh scars from a Vraxian plasma blade. He nodded to Samir as if greeting a fellow warrior, then marched him through the labyrinth of corridors and briefing rooms until they reached a heavily secured chamber. Here, Samir was to present the final iteration of the Cypherlance to key members of the Combine High Council, who joined via secure holoprojection. Samir spoke with measured composure, though inside he quivered with a cocktail of anxiety and guilt. He outlined how the Cypherlance exploited delicate weak points in quantum wave equations that formed the structure of most advanced shields. He described how, once activated, it would cause a cascading wave of disruption that overloaded shield energy grids within a range of 2 planetary diameters. The generals and counselors watched in silence. They had no knowledge of the advanced mathematics or theoretical physics. All they saw was a miracle weapon. Admiral Norin pressed for immediate deployment. He boasted that with just a few of these devices launched into the heart of enemy territory, they could cripple an entire fleet's defensive lines. Samir, cautioning them, argued that once used, the specifics of the device might be reverse-engineered by enemy scientists, triggering an arms race that no one could control. But the Council's thirst for victory drowned out any caution. An order was issued for mass production of the Cypherlance prototypes. Samir found himself bound to his new role. The Combine's greatest asset in a war for galactic supremacy. Word spread quickly that the Combine had gained a secret weapon. Rumors claimed it could breach the unbreachable. Fear rippled through the Vraxian Consortium's ranks as the first small-scale demonstration shattered the main energy shield of an enemy fortress on Lunax Maw. A triumphant wave overtook the Combine soldiers, cheering Samir's name in gratitude for giving them a fighting chance. In the hush of his quarters, Samir found no comfort. He gazed at the scuffed metal walls, replaying the destruction in his mind. Entire alien strongholds dissolving into chaos as the luminous aura of their protective fields vanished. He knew each fortress contained living creatures, families, workers, elders, maybe not so different from humanity. With the press of a button, the Combine's war machine had laid them bare. Some called Samir a hero, but he felt more like a weapon himself, used by the powerful to enact unstoppable violence. Overconfident from their quick gains, the Combine launched an ambitious offensive into Consortium space. Admiral Norin commanded the fleets from the Titan's Spear, carrying a dozen Cypherlances calibrated to neutralize entire star system defenses. Samir accompanied the operation as both researcher and technical advisor. Sleek human destroyers and carriers pushed through the jump gates that led to alien star systems, unleashing the new technology. The Vraxian capitals, one by one, found their carefully layered force fields disintegrating. Once the shields fell, endless waves of bombs and kinetic projectiles rained down. Early victories were so overwhelming that some Combine admirals proposed continuing straight to the Marduk homeworld, capturing a major capital city that had never fallen in recorded history. The High Council, emboldened, urged them on. It seemed unstoppable, an empire's unstoppable momentum. However, in the midst of this unstoppable wave, an unease crept among the Combine's officers and foot soldiers. News of the destruction soon returned to them in shocking detail. Entire cityscapes turned to rubble. An exodus of refugees fleeing into deeper, unclaimed stretches of the galaxy. Sympathetic, conscientious objectors spoke up, claiming that while the Concertum leaders had indeed threatened the Combine, the massive use of the Cipher Lance was exacting a toll that no one had contemplated. Whispers of war crimes circulated in clandestine circles. Sects of pacifists demanded the Combine avoid further devastation. Morale, ironically, began to shake even among some victorious fleet. Meanwhile, the Vraxian Consortium, unable to defend with their normal technology, turned desperately toward riskier avenues. The greatest turning point came shortly after the Combine's incursion into the hidden bastion of Idrasi. Situated behind a lavish system of plasma barriers, the fortress had always been rumored to house advanced alien R&D. Once the Combine used the lance to nullify Idrasi's formidable shields, a massive meltdown rippled through their central lab. Unstable quantum reactors exploded, leaving entire planets in that sector marred by radiation storms. The shock wave echoed across light years. Some claimed it would alter the gravitational stability of the region for centuries to come. Samir, forced to monitor the device's usage from aboard the Titan Spear, stared in horror at the screen. Thousands lost their lives in an instant. The conscious guilt weighed on him. But the combined higher-ups saw only the tactical advantage of having obliterated the enemy's research base. Another surge of frantic calls for escalation ignited. Samir, in a sudden fit of rage and conviction, shut down his console and refused to continue. For a moment, it felt like resistance. Then, he realized the Combine had other scientists who would be all too eager to continue his work. He confided his anguish in a small circle of trusted colleagues. Engineers, communications officers, and starship pilots who understood the horror unfolding. They devised a plan to sabotage the built-in command codes of the Cipher Lance, hoping to disable it or cause it to destruct upon activation. Samir relentlessly coded new failsafes at night, hidden from watchful eyes, while a carefully orchestrated misinformation campaign painted the sabotage attempt as routine maintenance. If successful, it would neutralize the device across all Combine fleets, effectively returning battle lines to the status quo. But their group was small. Only if they could coordinate infiltration of the mass production labs on the Titan Spear could they embed Samir's sabotage protocols in every manufactured lance. Word soon leaked to Admiral Noren's orbit of advisors that Samir was up to something. The timing was suspicious. Right after the meltdown at Rossi, Samir had abruptly cut communications and locked all external signals from his lab. Sentries started shadowing him, quietly scrutinizing his every turn. He realized that if he tried to personally infiltrate the labs, he risked immediate capture. The entire conspiracy hung by a thread. In a moment of clarity, Samir recruited Artis Mersol, an esteemed pilot newly assigned to the Titan Spear. Artis was no ordinary pilot. She had a knack for infiltration and specialized in high-stealth missions deep behind enemy lines. She leapt at the chance to stop the bloodshed, offering both her skill and unwavering courage. Under cover of false sensor readings that suggested a Vraxian raid, Artis and a team of engineers disguised themselves as emergency responders. They penetrated the labs, Injecting Samir's sabotage routines into the production lines, the sabotage code manifested as an innocuous protocol that automatically updated the Lance's targeting software. Once integrated, the code would scramble the Lance's quantum matrix manipulations whenever it was armed for firing, causing a massive feedback loop that would render the weapon useless, sometimes catastrophically. An urgent countdown clock ticked in their minds. Admiral Norn had scheduled a demonstration of a new variant, rumored to be even more powerful, for the next day. If the sabotage worked, as intended, Norn's demonstration would fail, forcing the Combine to reconsider its reliance on Samir's invention. If the sabotage was discovered beforehand, it would mean a swift execution for all involved. At dawn's first light on the Titan spear, the demonstration began. High-level counselors and war planners joined via hololinks from across the Combine. The live feed captured the flickering Covenant helm, a remote planetoid notorious for its extremely dense shield. Admiral Norrin, with a grand flourish, triggered the lance. Samir stood at the edges of the control room, heart pounding, as he waited to see the sabotage take effect. Initially, the streams of quantum energy looked normal. Then, an abrupt shriek of static hissed across the console, and the device's energy signature spiked out of any known scale. Engineers scrambled to contain it, but it was too late. In a flash, the entire land system short-circuited, sending arcs of electricity and plasmatic eruptions surging across the demonstration deck. The console erupted in a cascade of sparks, and the assembled crowd leapt back in shock. Instead of dissolving Covenant Helm's fortress shield, the demonstration weapon had collapsed in on itself. No more than molten slag. Disbelief descended over the watchers. Shapes of counselors flickered uncertainly in their hollow projectors. Admiral Norrin's face contorted in disbelief, trying to salvage the moment. But there was no denying the fiasco. The meltdown was so complete that the entire demonstration bay had to be sealed off. Further attempts to use the lance were halted to avoid another catastrophic burst. At first, the Combine leadership tried to downplay it as a faulty prototype. Behind the scenes, though, panic spread. Technicians discovered that every lance in production had been infected by the same flaw. Investigations soared in intensity. Meanwhile, the enemy alliance used the reprieve to regroup. Once the Vraxian consortium realized that the Combine's unstoppable weapon had abruptly vanished, they started preparing a counteroffensive. The galaxy held its breath. While confusion reigned among the Combine elites, Samir and his allies found a window of escape. Posing as a salvage crew needed to move wrecked spacecraft off the Titan spear, they boarded an old cargo vessel, the Twilight Envoy. The group never intended to join the Vraxians, nor did they plan to return home. Instead, they sought a place of exile far beyond the contested sectors. Some place neither the Combine nor the consortium patrolled regularly. Artists guided them through star systems riddled with cosmic debris and unstable wormholes. The journey felt agonizing, but eventually they reached an uncharted sector. An amber-hued star shone on a cluster of rocky planets and swirling asteroid belts. The Twilight Envoy settled on the largest of these worlds, a silent desert orb no one had bothered to chart. No one, they hoped, would think to look for them here. During those first months in hiding, Samir and his conspirators survived by rationing supplies from the ship's storage. Sparse vegetation dotted the dunes, offering scant nourishment. Samir spent long hours refining his notes, carefully rewriting the theoretical underpinnings of the cipher lands so they would never again be used for mass destruction. He took these notes and encrypted them into tiny data crystals, burying them in the desert so that if any force arrived to demand the technology from him, they would find nothing. Curiosity still flickered in his mind. The same intellect that had devised the lance wondered if there was a peaceful application for Wayfield disruption. But each time he recalled the images of entire civilizations laid bare, that flicker dimmed. Perhaps someday, across centuries, someone would put a gentler spin on the concept. For now, it stood as too dangerous to trust in anyone's hands. News trickled in through covert transmissions that Admiral Norrin had pinned the sabotage on a group of rogue scientist activists, naming Samir as the lead conspirator. The Combine was outraged at the betrayal, fuming that a once celebrated genius had secretly undermined their war effort. Some corners of the Combine's populace, however, treated him as a heroic figure who had averted unspeakable continued slaughter. The Vraxian Consortium, upon learning about the sabotage, ironically labeled Samir a savior for their cause, though they simultaneously cursed him for creating the monstrous invention in the first place. With the lance effectively neutralized, the war cooled into an extended, uneasy standoff. Fear of another galaxy-shaking weapon kept both sides from venturing too boldly. The unstoppable offense had collapsed. Empires that once stood high in their fortresses were forced back to the negotiating table. Samir thought about the countless lives saved because his sabotage succeeded, but he also remembered the lives lost during the brief period the weapon had been used. Credited with saving millions, but haunted by every casualty, he found it impossible to grant himself absolution. To survive on the desert planet, Samir's group built a modest settlement near a shallow reservoir. They fashioned small solar generators, collecting enough energy to run essential systems. They cultivated edible plants that adapted to arid soil. Over time, they shaped a hidden oasis, creating a refuge from the swirling storms, both literal and political. Sometimes, they glimpsed the trails of passing starships high above, but the planet's obscurity served as a cloak. Artists occasionally ventured to the outer edges of the system to gather intelligence, always returning with tidbits about ongoing peace negotiations or renewed skirmishes. Yet the cosmic stage no longer felt like their world. They had carved out their lives in quiet seclusion, forging a tight-knit community, bound by the knowledge of what they had done, and by the vow to avoid repeating those mistakes. One gray evening, while looking up at the darkening sky, Samir noticed a faint spark in orbit. An unidentified vessel dipped across the horizon, stirring a faint contrail of tinted ion exhaust. He froze, pulse quickening. This wasn't the typical flight path of a random traveler. He checked the settlement's makeshift sensor logs, discovering that the ship had landed on the planet's northern hemisphere. Tension coursed through him. Could it be an advance party from the Combine or the Consortium? He decided to investigate, accompanied by artists and a few volunteers. They traveled across barren dunes in a weather-beaten rover, eventually reaching the landing site at the edge of a jagged canyon. The craft was not a massive warship, but a scout vessel, modest in size and partially concealed under rocky outcroppings. A single person emerged from its hatch, arms raised in a gesture of peace. Cautiously, Samir approached. The visitor introduced herself as Sela Nix, a diplomat from the Freed Planets Coalition, an emergent alliance of neutral worlds seeking to de-escalate the ongoing conflicts. Nix had traced Samir's location using a chain of rumors and cryptic star charts. He explained that the Freed Planets Coalition believed Samir's knowledge and moral perspective were desperately needed to avoid yet another arms race. She offered him and his group a sanctuary among the freed planets if they were willing to advise on anti-weapon treaties. Listening to her words, Samir sensed that she spoke sincerely. To return to the galactic stage, however, was terrifying. He could be walking into a nest of hidden agendas, but if there was a genuine chance to prevent more horrors, perhaps it was worth risking everything once more. An argument erupted among Samir's settlement. Some insisted they stay hidden. The galaxy had proven cruel and manipulative, and returning would only expose them to more threats. Others, including artists, believed they owed it to all living beings to apply their hard-won wisdom toward forging peace. They had seen, firsthand, how quickly advanced technology can devastate civilizations. Perhaps they could help shape treaties that would prevent any empire, human or otherwise, from reigniting the race for unstoppable weaponry. Samir, after nights of sleepless reflection, acknowledged he had a responsibility to do better. He had an obligation to champion restraint, no matter how tenuous the effort might be. In the end, they decided to leave the desert planet. The Freed Planets Coalition offered an unspoken promise of hope for a galaxy exhausted by repeated cycles of violence. They carefully packed up their settlement, leaving behind markers so any future wanderers could find resources if they too were in dire need. Samir took one last walk over the rolling dunes, where he had buried the data crystals, verifying they still remained securely hidden. No outsider need ever lay hands on those dangerous blueprints. He boarded Nyx's small scout vessel, accompanied by Artis and half of their group. The others stayed behind, maintaining the outpost in case everything went wrong. A swirl of dust rose as the engines roared, and the craft ascended, leaving behind miles of golden desert that had served as their reluctant sanctuary. Their destination was the Freed Planet's coalition's capital, a newly established domain that prided itself on inclusive governance. Starships of countless designs and species drifted in and out of a bustling station. Myriad languages echoed through the corridors. Samir met other scientists from the Lathe, from breakaway human states from minor alien enclaves, many of whom had watched in horror as stuck in their ways empires clashed with unstoppable weapons. Together, they formed a new group, an assembly of reason, tasked with verifying that no empire possessed doomsday technologies. Over time, they developed universal treaties, systematically incorporating advanced detection systems to alert everyone if someone attempted to resurrect unstoppable devices. Though the war did not end instantly and tensions still simmered, the galaxy felt the shift of an era. The Vraxian Consortium, having suffered a near collapse of its defenses, learned to rely on alliances and negotiations rather than escalating weapons development. The Human Combine, robbed of its superweapon and shaken by political backlash, lost much of its momentum. Many worlds broke off, refusing to be governed by an empire that had nearly undone the entire region. The Freed Planet's coalition gradually built credibility, advocating for cooperation and problem-solving above blanket militarization. There were still cynics who predicted the entire arrangement would crumble into old hostilities, but for the moment, entire populations sighed in relief. Samir, no longer regarded as a pariah, found himself an odd figure, an inventor of the ultimate breach device, yet also the one who destroyed it. Some called him the father of the great deterrent. Some deemed him the accidental reaper. Others called him the architect of cautious peace. Years passed, and Summer watched the next generation of scientists, ambassadors, and explorers concentrate on forging new solutions to old challenges. If they asked for his mentorship, he would share insight on wave-field theory, only in broad strokes, emphasizing the potential for benevolent uses like medical scanning and planetary terraforming. He insisted on ignoring certain expansions of the theory that could replicate the Cypherlance's destructive capacity. His old regrets never vanished fully, but they gradually transformed into a sober wisdom. On reflective nights, he stood alone on a balcony, overlooking a peaceful cityscape, thinking about everything that had transpired. Thus, in the wake of the empire-shattering technology he had created, the galaxy found a measure of fragile balance, its leaders more wary of the paths that might lead them back to the brink. And so Samir lived out a life colored by remorse and hope in equal measure, knowing that just as science could elevate civilizations, it could easily bring them to their knees. On the horizon lay countless possibilities, but none were as certain as the enduring truth he had learned, that the power to subvert entire shields, to flatten entire worlds, was a power better left undone. In an ever-expanding universe, responsibility and restraint must accompany each new discovery. Only then could the countless souls scattered across the stars be safe from the invention that once threatened to tear them all apart.